Everyone in AISS 2021 Annual Information Security Summit that we are hosting virtually today. A very warm welcome to all of you. And this is the first masterclass that we are having today. That particular masterclass is by Tata Communication. And topic today that we have is building a smart security operations center and the practical applications of MITRE ATT&CK framework. We have eminent speakers from Tata Communication today to discuss the nuances of building a smart SOC and what are the practical application of Metadata framework. As you know that we are really moving from the IOC based approach to learning about tactic techniques and procedures of attackers and adversaries to know them better and how to prevent any such events or nefarious activity on our network. And we have been seeing that MITRE framework has been really helpful in terms of understanding the tactic, techniques, and procedures and steps that attackers follow. And that's why we are going to discuss today what are those practical applications of MITRE framework in your security operations centers. So to discuss that, I have three speakers from Tata Communication. So firstly, I would like to call Mr. Avinash. Uh, he'll be mainly talking about Tata Communications and Tata Communications managed security services portfolio, especially pertinent to security operations center and other security services. So I would like to welcome you, Avinash, for this masterclass.
Thank you, Vivek.
Secondly, we are going to have the practical applications of Metadata framework, where we are having Anup and Ramesh from Tata Communication team. Ramesh is joining in a while, but Anup, we have Anup with us. So Anup will be talking about some of the practical applications and core nuances of Metadata framework and how it is being useful for security operations center. And then there is a demo schedule that how we can use Metadata framework effectively during our security operations centers. And after demo, there will be ample amount of time will be given for a question and answer session. So I would request participants to really ask good questions, and speaker will be able to answer those questions. So now, without any delay, I would like to hand over to Avinash and Anup for their talk. Over to you, Anup and Avinash.
Thank you, Vivek. And thank you to the DSCI team for yet another exciting and vibrant event that is AISS. We know that it's been the flagship event, the way we see it, for cybersecurity in India. So we are very happy to be here as Tata Communications, as one of the sponsor partners as well. So firstly, let me wish all of you, the entire audience, a very warm good morning. I think warm is in order because it must be cold day in most of the places where we are dialing in from. Uh, Usually, we used to have this event, I think, in Gurgaon at the Leela, and this time we are all doing it virtually, as it happened last year as well. And great to be connected here. I'm presently connecting in from Bangalore, which is where I'm based. A few words about my own background. I've been in the industry for about 25 years now, and 20 years of which have been in cybersecurity. Presently, I have the responsibility and role of handling the cybersecurity services portfolio, primarily with a managed security services focus for Tata Communications and serving customers all over through our offerings. What I wanted to do in this session, where I'm joined by my colleagues as well, and they will be coming in respectively through this session, is be able to share with you a little bit about, as we say, the devil is in the details, and that cyber event, that cyber breach, what happened to that company, usually happens when something just slips through those details. So how to build a smarter SOC, which is where one can make it a much more pervasive and a stronger defensive capability, as well as a detection and response capability for the enterprise, is something that a goal that we are striving for, and for sure our customers and enterprises are also striving for. So that's something that we would want to talk to you and share with you in this workshop and session. As I said, I'll be joined by my colleagues. You can see Anup is there with us, and Ramesh Kumar will also be joining it shortly, and they would introduce themselves as they start their respective sessions. Having said that, let's start, and we can go into the slideshow mode. And let me give you a little bit of context of how Tatacom is approaching this space, what Tatacom does, and in a way why we are qualified to speak with you and share more information with you on this. So the if we can go into a slideshow mode, Anup, and put up the slides. Presently, I see it in slide sorter mode, and we have Ramesh also joining us now. So hi and welcome both Anup and Ramesh. We're just starting the session now.
Thank you, sir. I'm just representing my screen again, so that
Yes, please.
the entire
Yeah.
presentation can go.
Yes. So now we are in the slideshow mode. So without further ado, what we would like to talk to you about, as I said, is a little bit more about the work we do, our approach, our capability in this space, and why we are qualified to, to have this workshop, to carry out this workshop for you. And from there, we will talk to you about our whole experience and the build-up of how we have used the MITRE attack framework as a crucial enabler and a reference benchmark to really build a scalable model towards a smarter SOC. That will be followed by a demo as well, and we would be very happy to take your questions at the end of it. If we can proceed, please. So, broadly speaking, today Tata Communications as a business and as a service provider straddles the globe, and that's something that we have been doing for the last almost 20 years. We have a globally distributed employee base of 12,000 plus, cutting across different nationalities. Given that we are in the service provider business, we have registered entities across the globe so that we can serve in those countries as well. And customers drawn from top level enterprises as well as mid level enterprises, 7,000 plus of those. You can see 300 being from the Fortune 500. And customer execution, customer satisfaction is a critical focus area for us. So customer NPS, which is really a net promoter score, is something that is a top focus area for us, and happy to report that we have a good performance as well in that space. So if we can move ahead. So what are we doing broadly, right, today in our business? So we all know that the age of transformation is on us, and the power of digital, in any enterprise for any type of business is today, an extremely important enabler. So we see our role also as kind of we in a way power the internet, help connect to clouds and all that. We see our role as that of a digital ecosystem services provider and enabler. So today, for an enterprise to go digital, there are many layers of execution that they need to do, but some of the core important aspects and layers that need to be achieved in that, whether it be related to next generation connectivity, whether it be related to better adoption and utilization of cloud services, IoT solutions, mobility solutions, and of course, cybersecurity. So we have got our stack around all of these areas that you can see, and this helps us then really help further the customer goals around achieving their digital transformation programs, executing the digital transformation program successfully. And embedded within this philosophy is the fact that it has to be a very platform-based approach. In the platform is embedded the core infrastructure, specific tools and technologies that get integrated on top of that, followed by operations and services flows and specific functionality that gets exposed to customers as well. So we've got this layered approach that we look at in terms of how we service customers, and this is what makes it robust, internet grade, and also a multi-tenanted shared services that can be exposed to multiple customers. As we go further in this session, We will talk about how the cloud-based SOC that we offer today, our SOC service delivered on the cloud, is also another example of this kind of a platform. So this is how kind of we are engaging with customers today, and it is supported through, of course, our customer engagement philosophy as well as our own people philosophy, our drive culture. So with that, if we move ahead, so what is Tata Communications doing in cybersecurity? Just wanted to briefly share that with you. I can see that almost all our offerings are listed over here. I definitely won't talk about all the offerings. That's not the objective of this session. But we are firstly, as the network transforms for our customers, right? We are looking at the security transformation also that is going hand in hand with that. We have got proven, stable, mature platforms to protect the customers from inbound attacks from the internet, for anything which is exposed to the internet, whether it be DDoS type of attacks, whether there be kind of more application layer, low and slow attacks, malware driven attacks. And we have been doing this for many years, as well as now the notion of inbound is kind of disappeared because all the traffic is anyway on the internet. Everything is flowing directly from internet to internet. The egress traffic doesn't look like that anymore. The ingress traffic doesn't look like that anymore. So how to protect the traffic end to end on the internet is something that, again, we've got a lot of focus on, maturity around, through secure web gateway, internet gateway services, enhanced services around CASB, around WAF, etc. So we provide all of that. Then looking at multi-cloud security services, very important, which is where today the reality is that different clouds are being used by different enterprises in a fit for purpose mode. Whatever, in terms of IISS and SaaS platforms are being used by the enterprise, whatever is fit for purpose. But the need for security, firstly, cannot be done in a point by point manner for all of these different platforms in a hybrid world. There needs to be a holistic and cohesive approach. So that's what we have drive in this kind of an expanding multi-cloud environment. That what are those common set of controls and an execution and operating model around that at the agility of the cloud, and then additional specific controls which need to go in for specific environments. This is supported by, if you can see the cloud SOC on the bottom right, which is where we'll go deeper and deeper today in terms of how to really enable the an industry standard as well as a reliable detection, response, and recovery remediation service through the cloud SOC. We'll talk about that. And we do offer, very importantly, tied to these goals is finally how you manage your risk and compliance, how you report, how you monitor against that, and how do you do more proactive testing. So we offer services around that as well in terms of looking at risk and compliance, because many times it is a law for many of you who operate in different segments, as it is for us. That there are cybersecurity mandates and regulations that we have to follow and ensure that our organizations are fully in compliance with the same. So that's kind of a quick summary of the managed security services approach that we have, some of the offerings that we are taking to market. And this also takes me onto the path that innovation is really very important for us, because in some ways, security practitioners, we think of ourselves as playing the catch-up game with the attackers. But the fact is that today there is the specific headroom for innovation with the way we can use data, the way analytics can power our activities, and the way we can reduce dependency on the human factor. And we will be talking about some of that, how to tie it better to the business context, how to make the protection much more reliable and much more trustworthy for the enterprise. So that's what we will look at. With that, let's move ahead. And a quick summary to end my section specifically over here is, as I said, innovation is an extremely important part of how enterprises can also progress in terms of security posture, supported by a reliable service provider like us. So we work on different areas and different projects, whether it be the enablement of the MITRE attack framework, how it supports our use cases, how it supports driving a better industry context into our SOC for our customers, and then enhanced analytics-based projects, the platform-based projects that we are doing in terms of delivery, building delivery capabilities across SOC centers, and of course certifications for that, whether it be more industry-based mandates that you see called out over here, privacy-based mandates, and of course supporting regulatory frameworks as well. And all of this derived through the experience of having been engaged with hundreds of customers over the last 10 plus years. So that's what broadly I wanted to talk about here. And with that, let me hand over to my colleague, Anup, who will start with a brief intro and then go on to this thing, and Ramesh, who will be jointly along with Anup carrying out the session briefing and the demo session.
Yeah. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for this introduction and a very warm welcome to the audience. Very warm good morning, as Avinash sir mentioned in his introduction. So, just a brief introduction before I get into the slides. Uh, I manage the threat management or cloud soft portfolio as a product manager within Tata Communications. I am based out of Pune, and with me I have my colleague from the product engineering, Mr. Ramesh. Ramesh, over to you for a quick introduction.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Ramesh. I lead the security engineering division for managed security services, and overall, 19 years of experience in the security industry. Looking forward for a great session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ramesh. So, thanks to Avinash for setting the context with the presentation. So, as Avinash highlighted, we have a very mature and robust services around cloud SOC. What we do wanted to bring in was how we have been able to build maturity in our cloud SOC offerings uh, through specifically utilizing the MITRE attack as a framework. Uh, I am just going to bring my slides up again. Just allow me a minute while I do that. Ramesh, a quick check. Are you able to see the slides or see my screen?
Not at Anup. Slide has not come up.
Okay,
No, presently no.
okay. Let me try again. Ramesh, is it possible for you to start? I am having some issues with sharing my slides. If I can request you to bring up the slides,
Sure.
and I'll
Just give me a
take it from
moment.
there. Yeah, sure.
Are you able to see the screen?
Uh, Ramesh, I can see both our videos. Yes, now I can see the screen share. Indeed,
Okay.
now it's up. There you
There
go.
you go.
MITRE
Yeah.
attack overview. Over to you.
Anup?
Yeah, sure, Ramesh. If you can just, yeah, if you can go in, I think you'll have to put it in full screen mode. Ramesh, we are not able to see that right now.
It is in full screen.
Yeah, it is in
Yeah,
full screen. Anup, it's a bit
sure.
small. We'll have to resize
Yeah,
the window somehow
I
because the
I
font
think
is
we
very small.
I think we are able to get that, sir. I think if we are so just for the audience, if you are able to click on the screen which Ramesh is showing, specifically on the slides which you have put up, you will be able to see a full screen image of the slides which you are presenting. So thanks so much, Ramesh, for putting up the slides. So again, sorry for this small inconvenience while we put up the slides, and thanks to Avinash sir for that introduction. So we wanted to get right into the subject in terms of MITRE attack as a framework, how it has helped us in building a maturity on our cloud SOC services. And of course, we know for a fact that the audience here is a mix of veterans in this space, people who have heard or are practitioners of MITRE attack. However, what we wanted to do before we deep dive into how it has helped us in our cloud SOC journey is what is MITRE ATT&CK, and set a baseline in terms of how it can be approached from a practitioner perspective. So if I broadly look at MITRE, MITRE of course is a non-profit organization. They created MITRE ATT&CK, started with MITRE ATT&CK back in 2013. Uh, Now the particular representation which we have with the capture of the MITRE ATT&CK, it started with around 11 tactics. Now it has expanded to around 14 with 250 plus techniques as such. The whole I mean, I think the way I look at MITRE is there have been frameworks or attempts in the past to essentially clearly call out the path of an attacker within a customer environment. So, frameworks such as Lockheed Martin kill chain have been focused on the offensive side, which is how an attacker typically propagates within a customer environment, and those typically have been at a high level. We have some other frameworks such as SANS Top 20, SAS, etc., in defensive related related control. But here the framework guidelines to a practitioner. Where we see MITRE beautifully combining both offensive and defensive securities. Here is one framework which essentially calls out how an attacker at a high level tries to get access to a customer organization, which is the 14 tactics which we talked about. Then further those motives, or if I call that as adversary motives, those adversary motives then further get drilled down into 250 plus techniques which specifically call out how does the attacker execute those motives within a customer environment. Now the beauty with this framework is there is no dearth of details within the techniques as well. You have sub techniques and procedures which go into low level details as to how a particular attack has been executed or has been executed in the past within a customer environment. And now with the recent version of MITRE, which is version 10, the mapping of how the adversary motive to how he executes these motives within a customer environment is further mapped to the defensive side, which is through a definition called as data sources. So this is one framework which beautifully combines how an offensive minded red teaming slash attacker looks at a customer environment, and two enables defensive blue teams or SOC teams to map that attacker motive back to the data sources which they have in the customer environment, clearly chart out what is it that they have to focus on in terms of building specific detection pattern, threat intelligence, etc., to detect such attacks for their customers. So current version of MITRE, which we will focus on today, is MITRE ATT&CK for enterprise. We know for a fact that MITRE has significantly expanded this work to include industrial control systems as well as mobile security as well. But what we'll focus today is the enterprise segment, or MITRE ATT&CK for enterprises, specifically looking at how we utilize the data within the tactics, techniques, and the data sources to lend itself to one, use case creation, and two, how we can basically use this in other disciplines such as threat intelligence, threat hunting, automation, and response. What we will also do is further on to further elaborate that this is not just a theoretical exercise. We would show specific examples where we have blended the different parts of MITRE, which is looking at how an advisory exploits attacks, how we can detect it, as well as how we can automate response around it as part of a demonstration. Ramesh, with that being said, if we can yeah. Now I think
So, Anup,
as I said,
if
yeah,
we can
yeah,
also,
yes,
to engage the audience, if we can also flash question, our quiz
yes,
question,
yes,
so that you could get some interaction and response going.
sure,
Can we ask
sure.
the DSCI team, please?
Yes, I would request the DSCI team to also pull out, or present the first slate of question to our audience.
See the poll question up now.
Okay, thank you to the DSCI team. Uh, so essentially, and I think to summarize, why MITRE. We, of course, as I said, It's a great framework for offensive and defensive teams both, which is either the red team, blue team, or the purple team as they call it now, where both red and blue teams essentially engage to chart out how do they collaborate and build better detection patterns within the customer environment. Now, this pyramid of pain has been put out back in 2013, but I think with the recent, weekend, which I believe most of the security practitioners would have had a hard time, which is with the Log4j zero-day vulnerability. I think most of us would have had a sleepless weekend, trying to remediate or just figure out, what has been the impact of such a widely used open source library. So that beautifully summarizes, I think, the problems with traditional ways of detection, and which is beautifully represented in this pyramid of pain. Now, if I look at hash values, IP addresses, domain names, etc., these are typically indicators of compromise which you would have in a threat intelligence feed, which in any organization can be as part of a network security product, or it could be a part of a detection and response product. Typically, the challenges with this in today's world is that most of this information is a point in snapshot of somebody behaving maliciously, and we know for a fact that now with the public cloud services, people can spin up public IP addresses. These public IP addresses tend to be, of course, having a high or very low reputation in terms of security risk. uh, each of these values are subject to change. So for example, we have this example that mimikatz, which is one of the widely used red teaming tools, and of course also now sought by attackers. If we change the name of that mimikatz to a different exe, so is going to be the change in the corresponding hash values. Now what this essentially leads itself to is that you can of course have a point in time snapshot view of what are the hash values, etc., IP addresses, etc., to bring a value of, or talk about what are the different type of attacks which are happening in the customer environment. But if you want to build a very robust defensive blue teaming program, what an organization needs to focus on is the top three parts of the pyramid, which at some point do get covered as part of the MITRE attack framework. So of course, when we talk about MITRE attack, we tend to relate it with the tactics, techniques, and procedures. But what the techniques and sub techniques also lend is they beautifully talk about what is the kind of behavior which an attacker will use when he is within the customer environment, within an organization. So for example, is he using Windows command line instrumentation? uh, what type of ports is he going to use? So essentially artifacts associated with network and host. So host artifacts could be what is the type of process or native systems, which native processes which are going to be used as part of the attack. Tools, as I mentioned, is he going to use something like a cobalt strike? Is he going to use mimikatz? So that also is something which gets elaborated as part of the MITRE attack. And of course, where it all comes together is the tactics, techniques, and procedures. So as I said, tactics is essentially the adversary motives. Techniques is a further breakdown on how those motives can be executed, and the sub techniques and data sources essentially bridge the gap between how the adversary executes that attack and how a defensive team, that is a SOC team, can either detect that pattern through a sim rule or other rule on their detection tools, or what is the kind of mitigation they need to take within their environment to block or stop that attack. So the top three aspects of this pyramid of pain, which is network host artifacts, tools, tactics, techniques, and procedures, are all covered as part of the MITRE attack framework. And what we'll try to do is we'll further try to dissect this as part of the upcoming slide as to how this can be covered through the MITRE attack, or mapping it to our methodology for improving detection and response. Uh, Ramesh, if I may request to move to the next slide.
Sure.
Also, Anup, we see that we have a few responses. So on the first question,
Yes,
if you could, you and Ramesh could comment on that. I think most people got it right, but if you could just take a look at it on the chat box, poll panel on
sure.
the right.
Sure, sir. I will do that. Yes.
You can
I
see
think
the
we
big
have,
holes.
yeah, yeah. I think we have a very good response from most of the audience. So it looks like, we have people who are very well accustomed to how to use MITRE ATT&CK. And as I said, I think the next part of the discussion, which is how to use this specific information within MITRE and map it back to your security program, you are, really going to like the approach which we have put together for, the next round of discussion. So,
If I can
uh,
ask the DSCI team also to put up
yes,
the second question also to keep the engagement going.
sure. Sure, sir.
Go ahead, Anup. Back to you.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. So now I think, we'll try start getting into specifics. So of course, MITRE ATT&CK, as I said, uh, we want to, address the topmost pain areas in terms of detection and response within a customer environment. We are talking about network and host artifacts. We are talking about commonly used tools for executing such attacks, and of course linking it back to the tactics, techniques, and procedures which an attacker will use within a customer environment. Now, how do, we see, MITRE aligning to what we call as a next generation SOC? And, of course, if we call today's SOC or, the next generation SOC, some of these items are presently part of the SOC, which is, for example, I'll start with the topmost part, which is cyber threat intelligence. Now, as I said right at the start, that today cyber threat intelligence probably can be looked as a point in time snapshot of IP, URL, hash, domain information. Two, it can also be brand specific information in terms of, what is the social media, exposure of a particular organization, etc. Now, further drilling down, how MITRE lends itself to cyber threat intelligence. Now, I would put it like this, that essentially MITRE, you can have three levels of maturity within each of these categories. Now, if you are an organization which is, just getting started with MITRE attack, the first step would probably be to look at individual tactics, techniques applicable to you as a organization based on the vertical. Now, one of the great parts with MITRE attack is that MITRE attack is also deep dive into focus areas for a specific vertical. So if you go into MITRE attack, there is a specific tab on groups. Now, what that groups tab essentially is, it's a known APT activity, and what MITRE also does within that particular activity is further classify that in terms of the corresponding vertical against which that APT actor has been very active. So, as an organization, one of the first things which we recommend or we definitely take as part of our SOC programs is build relevance on threat intelligence specific to the industry in which you operate. So, for example, if it's a healthcare or pharma vertical, going into MITRE attack, looking at the corresponding groups which are relevant or active in that particular vertical. What are those tactics and techniques which are relevant to you? Basis this information on, which vertical they are operating. So, for example, threat intelligence specific to a vertical could be somebody using Windows process instrumentation. Going further down, what particular process or executable and the corresponding payload of that particular executable should be detected by my SOC. So that is a great example of threat intel coming in from somebody who is actively looking at MITRE attack, researching the corresponding APT group activity, and giving you those feedbacks to be fed into your SOC or detection program. Uh, Again, the same also applies to threat hunting. Now, as I said, and probably, again, this relevance to industry vertical, really builds up. uh, because if I look at MITRE attack as a framework, uh, initially just looking and mapping it to a, an organization can be very daunting, because we are talking about 14, high level tactics. We are talking about 250 plus techniques, and within that there are multiple sub techniques. Now, at, this can be really daunting for any organization to begin with, that how am I as an organization really going to build this maturity? Do I need to take a stepwise program, or should I go for big bang and start building compliance against all these 250 techniques? So that's where this focus on maybe building relevance to you as an organization based on your vertical really helps. And that is the approach we also take as part of our MSSC service, because it's not possible to build detection patterns against all 250 techniques to begin with. So what we recommend is, one, you have threat intel specific to the vertical which you operate. Of course there are going to be gaps within the threat intel. How do I build a proactive detective strategy, not only relying on the threat intel and the use cases? So that is something which we can build through the threat hunting program. Now when I talk about threat hunting, what we are essentially referring to is, let's take the example which I took, that I know that a particular APT group is very active in a certain industry vertical. I might be building detection patterns for this, but it might take me a good 1.5 months to build those detection patterns. Now how am I as an organization going to be actually proactively looking for any signs of compromise within my environment? So that is all going to be possible through a threat hunting, where essentially somebody looks at the logs, flow data, or the endpoint data, looks at those specific patterns. He does a combing of the corresponding logs within your environment, and what they are specifically looking as is the sub techniques or procedures which are getting or which are visible within these logs. So for example, uh, if there is lot of activity associated with PowerShell within your environment. Now, of course, most of the organizations are building automation at large scale. This is particularly true for most organizations who have embraced cloud in a big way. There is DevOps as well. Now, PowerShell is a widely used tool within any environment, specifically for ops-based automation. But what I do look is, there are specific techniques which talk about obfuscation of the payload from PowerShell. So what this threat hunting is going to focus on is, there is probably going to be thousands if not millions of PowerShell events within an environment. Now can I look or filter down this data to specific PowerShell attempts where the payload itself is obfuscated, or somebody is trying to obfuscate the payload of PowerShell? Now that to me is a clear signal that we need to do better detection, or build more relevance around why this particular activity has been executed. So that's what we call as threat, basically using MITRE ATT&CK and specifically the procedures within MITRE ATT&CK for the threat hunting program as such. uh, we also have some slides around response. Now this is one element which of course is always a focus area for us, particularly as a MSSP. We handle at any point of time close to 50,000 events during the course of a day. The objective for us, of course, is to automate many of these responses. And typically the assumption is that when I say automation, it is just an automated response on a given security device. That's not only the part of automation. What we do focus on is the enrichment part of it, which is where we try and pull in data as much as possible from threat intelligence, other sources, asset sources, etc. Now, where MITRE really lends itself well to a response strategy is, as I said, you have the tactics, you have the techniques, you have the procedures, you also have the mitigation. So, of course, this is an area where we see continuous improvement in MITRE, which is mitigation and detection. So, if you look at any particular technique and you deep dive within the procedures, what MITRE does is, it also talks about, one, a detection pattern for that particular procedure. It also talks about the mitigation for it. So those mitigations, can those be automated? Of course, most of the organizations today have embraced endpoint security response products, and we know for a fact that if I break down the data sources within MITRE, uh, the most common data sources which they refer to are typically process monitoring and network monitoring. Network monitoring as in endpoint related process monitoring. So the endpoint detection and response products typically do a very good job in collecting that telemetry data, And the mitigation or response basically plays a lot on some of these products. Can I use these EDR products? Basically, once I have detection for these data sources, how I can mitigate a response, which could be an isolation of the endpoint at a minimum level. Once I do detect that variable, uh, effectiveness assessment. So I think today the demonstration video which we will put up will talk about this. But any of course, every organization has a maturity curve in terms of you know building a effective response strategy around MITRE attack. Where we see the most mature organizations operating is that they have two sets of team, where one is a team which simulates MITRE attack tactics and techniques, which could be as simple as using MITRE Caldera, Atomic Red Team, which are of course publicly available. They lend themselves to executing these techniques in a non-disruptive way and test your mitigation strategy. But there are organizations who have now moved beyond you not only using these tools, but also moved on to a maturity where they are trying to build this whole simulation testing infrastructure, where they simulate one part of their team as a advice complete adversary, and they focus on building not only the native tools such as Cobalt Strike, Mimikatz, etc., but try and build their own set of tools and techniques to see if there is sufficient capability within the detection and response side to detect their behaviors. So assessment of existing you know tools through MITRE attack is also something which we see as a very key maturity curve for most organizations. As a MSSP, we have taken steps to make that part of our program, and we'll talk about that also in the next set of slides. And maybe I have elaborated this already. The final part where we see MITRE attack really playing itself out beautifully is there has always been this debate around what is an effective use case, particularly when there is a SIM slash MSSP slash MDR provider who you as an organization are engaging. Now typically it has mostly come down to experience that people who are operating the SOC or creating these rules based on their experience in the past, they tend to bring a certain industry based standard use case from from their past experience. What MITRE has allowed us to do as a MSSP as well is basically create a very high standard in terms of what do we define as minimum requirement for detection within a customer environment. So this could be for example, as I said, the tactics and techniques based on the data sources within your environment, creating use cases around those. Second, it could be more vertical focused, where using the data, as I said, MITRE attack basically also gives you that capability that you can look at MITRE attack and say that, okay, I have belong to the financial services or government vertical. What are the tactics and techniques relevant to me? So you can build a complete detection strategy based on what is relevant to you. So this has also helped us, because this has helped us to create a very standardized set of detection patterns. Two, it has also helped us to create a standard set of detection patterns for most industry verticals as well. So we see this coming together. So if you see this, right, it's essentially what we would call as SOC 2.0, where MITRE attack, the tactics, techniques, and procedures, and of course other information such as the sub techniques and data sources, lending itself to a SOC program where you have validated threat intel. You can do proactive investigations to threat hunting. You can build automated response. You can keep measuring the effectiveness of the SOC. Is it in are you have you invested, I mean, while you as an organization might have invested in the best set of products, are they at the right configuration in terms of detecting the next generation of attacks? And of course, keep on enhancing the current SOC through building mature use cases. So with that being said, I'll just request Ramesh to move on. So what we'll do is now we'll start getting into the specifics of each of these. Um, so yeah, yeah. As I said, I think I elaborated on this in the last slide. But if I take a look at this slide, right, how do I build a very robust use case library through MITRE attack? Now, On the left, you will see a box which is the known techniques procedures. Uh, that is a great source of input in terms of building a strong library. Uh, a strong library of use cases which I can deploy in any organization. And basically the organization starts realizing the benefits of a very mature detection and response strategy aligned to a particular vertical, so to say. But how do I further map it to your environment? So that's where I think the job of an MSSP or service provider comes in. Is that one, you have the library, you have the data sources, but if you take a look at the data sources currently, uh, we have seen a lot of improvement with MITRE attack version on version in terms of the data sources. So some of you who have been following MITRE attack very closely, uh, 3 years back they started doing work on better representation of data sources, because some of the top two data sources, as I said, in MITRE attack says process and registry monitoring, and it also talks about endpoint data or endpoint telemetry data. Now, what it doesn't talk about is what are those specific logging levels which are to be implemented, within that particular device. Of course, that is something which they are working on, and I am sure that as they further, you know, further add to the version, they release MITRE attack updates are released biannually. So I definitely see that maybe down the line that information also getting percolated. uh, but there is a lot of work to be done by the organization in terms of deciphering that information onto the devices which you have. So for example, if process and registry monitoring is a top use case in MITRE in terms of customer attacks, what is the right level of logging I need to enable on my devices? Is native Windows logging enough for that? Do I need to enable something like Sysmon? I have an endpoint detection and response product already. So is that coverage good enough for me in terms of what MITRE attack is giving? Those are all questions which typically need a further deep dive on. And this is the part where we as MSSP have tried to build strength on. That is, what are those products or native tools within the operating system, for example, which can give visibility on these techniques and procedures. So the representation on the right essentially is a representation of that when you are talking about the different types of controls which an organization would have implemented, what is the kind of logging level which is to be implemented? Is there some recommendation which I can give to you as a organization that this is the additional data I need for detecting these MITRE behaviors? uh, if you are implementing something like a Sysmon, what is the native logging level which you would have to implement to detect this PowerShell attempt, Windows instrumentation related attacks, so and so forth. So that is a part where we have spent a lot of time and effort on. So as I said, on the left we know what are those tactics techniques, we also know the data sources. The one on the right is where we have spent a considerable amount of time, is what is it that you as an organization need to make change on or need to enable on your side to get actionable data into the detection and response system, so that these MITRE use cases can be triggered. So uh, we have also given some examples that on the in the bottom, so kind of elaborate that uh, data sources, if I am talking about persistence via native scripting, native Windows servers log should do. Same is the case for any spear phishing attempt. What is the kind of security technology coverage I should have in terms of delivering or detecting this pattern within your environment? So this is the part or philosophy which we have used on our side to build a very strong and standardized use case library. What we'll also do is further on give you a very real world practical view of how this has been executed by us in some of our engagements. So let me just, yeah. So yeah, I think this again, probably I have elaborated on this, but just a very quick overview. So typically the view is that threat intelligence is always about, as I said, the view is that you have the indicators of compromise, and there is this investment in security tools which any organization has made, and those also do come with their own threat intel, right? So how does MITRE or MITRE TTP basically lend a role in terms of threat intel? So as I said, this is very specific adversary information. uh, if you have a threat intel team or somebody who focuses on threat intel, of course you keep getting this IOC data, which is IP, URL, domain, and hash. You might also get social media and other exposures, other information related to exposure via brand monitoring service. But how do you utilize something like MITRE attack for threat intel? As I said, the the way which MITRE attack has been built, it lends itself to further deep diving in terms of what is relevant to you as an organization. So I can take a particular APT group. I know it is operating in a certain region. So, of course, if it's operating in the region, India and nearby region, we know it's relevant to us. We can further dissect that based on the type of vertical with which it is operating. And what a threat intel team can essentially do is look beyond the typical IOC information and also give specific information on how is it that you can detect these behaviors. So again, threat intel not specifically as in IOC information, but as I said, if you look at the pyramid of pain, give more information around what are those network and host artifacts which you as an organization can look at. So one example, as I said, right, uh, threat intel could be that I know for a fact that a certain geography is being targeted by APT group. They rely on two different techniques, which could be a Windows instrumentation or a PowerShell obfuscation. So please make sure that as part of the threat intel or advisory team basically gives input to the detection or blue team, saying that please focus your effort on detecting these two patterns from the logs you are collecting. So this is the kind of intelligence which we see um, coming up. As a threat intel provider, what we also focus on is, I also have this huge telemetry information which is coming in, which could be OSINT, deep dark web, commercial fate, so on and so forth. Now, to build relevance for you as a customer, if you have already started doing work on MITRE, what will lend itself well to your program is if I can classify this information onto a particular stage of MITRE attack. So what we as a MSSP try to do is, whenever a threat intel or advisory goes to our internal team or even to our customers, we focus on telling them that this is the tactic and technique which is getting executed. These are the sub procedures which are being used by this particular group when they are targeting environments which we see. So what this basically allows you to do is, uh, if you are mapping yourself against that tactic and technique and your coverage around those, that can help you showcase where you are in terms of a detection and response strategy around that. So as I said, from a threat intel and threat intel provider, where we work ourselves consistently is identifying what is the value which threat intel can do in terms of building relevant detection based on the vertical or geography which you operate, to taking in all the data which we have from different sources, classifying it to a corresponding tactic and technique from within MITRE, and feeding it back to you as an organization. So this is what, yeah, Ramesh, please.
And yeah, Mither also provides a number of native tools which we can use in alignment to threat intelligence. There is a tool known as threat report attack mapping, which is TRAM. That can help making this TTB mapping in an automated way. We can ingest threat reports into the TRAM tool, and TRAM tool will be able to also identify what kind of TTPs are actually related to that particular threat advisory. And with a certain bit of automation, you can ingest the threat reports into the tool, and the system can again ingest this intelligence back into your threat intelligence platform, which can be disseminated for multiple other purposes.
That is great feedback, Ramesh. So if we can move on to the next slide, Ramesh, please. Yeah, yeah. So I, again, as I said, we have many use cases of MITRE, and if we start, drilling down that, as I said, the objectives, we can accomplish multiple objectives through MITRE, one of which is, of course, threat hunting. um, Now, of course, there are multiple stages of maturity, which we see in terms of a customer network or customer organization. But what we have tried to do is, rather than using, some, as I said, when we wanted to standardize the use case library, we have established MITRE attack as a good baseline for those detections. And same also applies for threat hunting, where, you know, we have largely standardized, because essentially this is a global data set of, what is that the attacker is looking at from a high level motive perspective, and it goes right down to the lower level details as to how that motive gets executed within the customer environment. So rather than relying on, a person's skill, and threat hunting is an area where, which has typically been very skill dependent. I mean, you need people with exceptional skills typically to look at, lots of log data, taking full packet data via something like Wireshark, and try and see, is there an anomaly which I can see through this, kind of data collection. So it has been typically a lot of skill focused. And where we see MITRE really lending itself beautifully to this discipline is kind of standardizing threat hunting to a known tactic and techniques pattern. Of course, there are always going to be unknowns, which are going to be there. But by and large, a huge library or a known library of, what is that the attacker typically execute, how is he that he executes, is something which MITRE lends itself beautifully. And this also then gets translated into threat hunting, where I might have a person who is exceptionally skilled and continuously looking at MITRE to build, logics for what kind of data sources am I to look at, what are those patterns I, look when I am searching through a huge amount of either log data or deep, network data, so and so forth. But this skill basically can then be translated onto people who can just go into the system and look for these specific behaviors from this huge data set of either logs or, network packets. Now, as I said, if I just break it down by data sources, endpoint and network is the top two data sources, within MITRE. Of course, endpoint leading the way by quite a few mile in terms of, with regards to the other data sources. And of course, endpoint do generate a huge amount of data. So as I said, the approach which we have taken is, we have a, a threat intel team, which looks at, the global threat intelligence data set. What they also look at is, when we are onboarding any customer, and of course this approach can be, of course, mimicked by any organization who is trying to use MITRE attack for threat hunting, is build a relevancy in terms of what are those known tactics and techniques which are relevant to you as a vertical. uh, Build a library of, commonly used TTP combinations. So as I said, we have named few of these during the discussion. So, something like a PowerShell, Windows instrumentation, uh, these are good examples of, these tactics, techniques which can actually, they're good examples of techniques and procedures which can span across multiple tactics altogether. So, for example, Cobalt Strike is another example. That Cobalt Strike is a tool which can probably span, multiple stages of tactics, right? So, build a library of these. Once you decipher that these are the known, tactics, techniques, and procedures, either based on your industry vertical or the geography, breaking it down into further into tools and processes which are going to be used by those particular, tactics or threat actors, and create a threat hunting hypothesis. So one example could be that create a threat hunting hypothesis where I look at the web server logs, I look at a certain access code within the web server or access log. Two, I look at all PowerShell, related transactions which have occurred. Look at specific examples where somebody tried to obfuscate the PowerShell payload, and basically give that as a output or deliverable to the customer. So what we have been able to see is that this has lended itself to building a very highly mature and scalable operation on threat hunting, where, rather, as I said, that, this discipline started being very personal and skill dependent. It is it still probably is, when somebody is trying to define the actions which a person can take. But at least we can pass this known behavior detection to people, L2 for example, and then them executing these behaviors within the customer environment, getting the data back and presenting back to the customer with those findings. So as I said, MITRE has lent itself beautifully to threat hunting. As an organization, uh, we have standardized on threat MITRE attack for our threat hunting reports. So any threat hunting assignment which we take in any organization, we build a report which is mapped specifically to the tactics. So we build a high level metrics of, this is the tactic I am looking at based on the relevance to your organization, this is the technique, these are the procedures which I am going to execute, and this is the output, this is the corresponding priority. So not only have we mapped it back to threat intelligence and use cases, but by and large embraced it for our threat hunting discipline as well. So Ship, I may, yeah. Yes. And I think Ramesh, if you maybe want to elaborate on this a bit more
Sure.
through this,
Yeah.
yeah.
So yeah, in the previous slide, we talked about how do we combine uh, the frequently used tactics together and techniques together for threat hunting hypothesis. So in the left side, what you're seeing is output from Attack Navigator, which is again a free tool available from MITRE itself. We can open this navigator, we can choose a particular group, and then we can figure out what are the tactics and techniques that this particular threat actor has taken to achieve his objectives, right? So what we do in Tata Com is we do this research of multiple different attacks, and we have created our own library on what are the techniques that are often used together. For example, in the right side, when you see execution, user execution, commonly used port is a technique which is often used together from user execution. So with these threat technique combinations, what we do is we have created hypothesis in the backend which will look for the first a technique, and if it is able to figure out an indication on the first technique, it will move to the frequently used technique, so that we can create a bigger picture on what exactly is happening from the first technique that got triggered. So you can try this from Attack Navigator itself. You can choose a particular group, and you can completely fetch out the pattern that the particular attacker has taken. The right side, whatever we are showing, involves a lot of build of the library, and follow up with threat hunting hypothesis creation out of that.
Thank you, Ramesh. So yeah, I think this is one area where, as I said, uh, we as a MSSP, have really tried to be at the forefront of it. That is essentially using automation, one for enrichment, two of course automation as in look for automated response. Now this essentially, this whole workflow kind of puts all of that together, that how we are using MITRE attack for essentially both the enrichment part, which is to give the analyst, let's say, if not an automated response which we want to execute at the end of this particular process workflow, how is it that we can present maximum possible information to the analyst so that his triage time is reduced to minimum possible, because we are talking about literally thousands of events which are hitting us at any point of time. Now, so this workflow, uh, essentially what it represents, and this also links back to the earlier slides which we presented, where we said that the whole philosophy is that uh, the use cases which are triggered, those should get triggered based on MITRE attack. The use case library itself is based around MITRE attack. So what we are representing here is that once the alert gets triggered, we know that a certain technique is getting executed. These are the typical procedures. So what is it that I can get? What is it that I can use to add additional context or information before it gets before it gets into that next decision cycle for either the analyst manually, or somebody like or a tool like SOAR, which is probably going to take an automated action based on that. So here the step number 3 is, once this particular technique gets triggered, I am going to add a lot of enrichment to it. Now if you are talking about enrichment here, what sort of enrichment? So eh, of course, as I said, our focus is to continuously reduce human intervention, at least for the first level response. So uh, right now on our end, we have close to 80% of our tickets which are automated before it is presented to an analyst. Now this enrichment, once this use case is triggered, it is mapped to a particular technique. So based on the technique, we add this enrichment information, which could be threat intel based. It could also be the analytics engine based. So for example, you know uh, what is the user, typically what has been the risk profile associated with that user, or a baseline risk score for that user based on his past activities. It could also be a system level activity where this is the baseline for system activities for on that particular system, and today the risk score is at this level. Third is information from other sources. So has there been a antivirus report done for this asset recently? If yes, has it been involved in any kind of virus related outbreak? What has been the typical vulnerability scan report for this asset? Are there some active CVs which are present on those system? So all those information is essentially something which we add beyond what is detected through the MITRE attack. Now the right part, which is what Ramesh has represented here, is that based on the enrichment. Right now the enrichment will tell us that, for example, as I said, when we are taking in all this data, one could be this IOC score. uh, Sorry, just 1 minute only. Yeah, so one could be this IOC score, which essentially indicates that it's a high severity incident. uh, Two, it could be that as I said, if I am pulling the data from antivirus or vulnerability scanning systems, is there an active CV which is we know for a fact is getting exploited? Then that automatically lends itself to a high risk score, which in case we have a notification sent out with the high priority. I mean, so the initial analysis, automated analysis itself has lended itself to confirm that it's a high severity incident, and I need to notify this immediately. And of course the next part of this action is that now I know that it's a high priority incident, and the philosophy which we are also trying to implement at our end is, if there is a high priority incident, how we can come to 100% automation for these high priority tickets. Now at a high level, typically the IOC containment, as I said, endpoint is the most talked about log source from a MITRE attack perspective. Now most of organizations have embraced EDR or endpoint detection and response product, and typically those are also cloud based. So that lends itself beautifully to a cloud to cloud integration with our environment, where based on detection of a high priority alert, we can have a cloud to cloud integration, and through the cloud native integration we can isolate those endpoints. Or as in case of something like a cloud based secure web gateway, or it could be an on premise firewall as such, basically block those IOCs within these respective solutions. So the idea is that enrich the data which is coming from MITRE. If it's a high priority ticket, basically do an automated response. If it is not, and we see that it's not a high severity, at least can we start doing the next cycle, which is we have identified a technique. So as Ramesh was highlighting in the last slide, we know that there is a common set of actions which get associated with this technique. So can I search for those, and can I automate the search for those? So this is the second part of the response, where we see that once we have if it is not lending itself to an automated or high severity automated response, then at least, because we have now flagged, we have a list of known events which typically follow this technique, can I execute all of them in an automated manner, and get as much information as possible which is get presented in my system. So that's the way we are using MITRE ATT&CK, even for SOC automation as well. The results in blue, essentially the whole automation engine is something which, we are adding to what MITRE gives us as base information. Ramesh, if we, I think, yeah, and yeah, so I know I am also conscious of the fact that we have to cover the demo as well. So this is something which of course, as I said, this is ingrained into our offering that if I am, how is a good way to measure the effectiveness of the detection and response controls you have in your end? Uh, to use simulation testing, see how your rules are they getting triggered, do you have the right threshold levels, basically a continuous feedback between the team which does this assessment and the SOC team. So what we have standardized by and large on our end is MITRE Caldera for this simulation of these attacks, and we have some videos, as I said, of those simulations as well. uh, of course, if you are an organization who are using some other frameworks such as Red Canary's Atomic Red Team, that is also, or you are using a, third party breach simulation testing tool, those are all elements which you can use. Uh, as we said, this MITRE philosophy, what we have done is we have taken a set of, known utilities endorsed by MITRE, in this case being MITRE Caldera, to essentially simulate the rules and the use cases and give out a report to say that, okay, the current set of controls which you have is either right, or there is a level of, there is a gap between the corresponding MITRE technique and what we are what you have configured, and what can, what requires to be further fine tuned to detect that particular activity. So we'll show that also. I mean, this is part of the video which we have. Yeah. So I think, to summarize, I think, this is where we see, highly mature, organization really coming in. So of course, I think MITRE themselves say that even if you are 100% compliant to all, techniques within MITRE attack, you shouldn't consider yourself safe, and that's very much the case for us as well. So elements on the left, by no way we can say that, by having, this is something which has to be a continuous nature. So continuous evaluation, continuous analysis is the key. But we see the five major pillars where MITRE is used, which is use case, threat intel, threat hunting, automation, red teaming. uh, where we see all of them coming together is basically threat informed defense. Now, why we say threat informed defense is because, as I said, right at the start, MITRE itself is, uh, a library of known threats and how they execute. So if you are putting a defensive strategy around what a threat actor is doing and how he, what type of procedure he is using to execute those attacks, then that is what we would call as a threat informed defense approach. And as I said, the elements on the left constitute all of that, which is threat intel, a use case library, doing a proactive investigation through SOAR, continuous assessment of your tools, and of course the automated response based on what you're detecting through MITRE attack. I think good. So yeah, I think so. I we'll spend the next 15 minutes just talking about these use cases, and I'll be very brisk in this so that we give some time for the demonstration. But yeah, I mean, from a uh, building a relevance to the customer environment, how does that happen? So one, of course, a great source is MITRE attack. Other is what is the customer attack surface, what is the assets you are exposing, what is that typically lures the attacker when he is targeting you as a vertical. Are there, is it something to do with money, is there some espionage, etc. I mean, many, what are those, what is it that you expose which is of interest to the customer? Wh- how is it that the attack surface is exposed, which is the threat vectors? It could be something like a, phishing to any of those threat vectors, and then of course mapping it back to the current set of devices or security devices or any set of devices which you have in your environment. So we'll elaborate this on much more detail in the next set of slide. But what we just wanted to add is MITRE attack is a great source which can be further contextualized based on your environment and your set of devices to build a relevant set of use cases and also the corresponding set of automated playbooks within the environment.
I think it's time for
So
some customer interaction. Sorry,
yes,
audience interaction, Anup and Ramesh. So if
sure,
we could ask
sure,
the
sure.
DSCI team to
Yes,
pop the next quiz question, please.
please. Yes, yes.
As they are doing that, yeah, we can meanwhile continue as well.
Sure, sure, Vinesh. So yeah, so I think the last slide kind of summarized this very well. Now I'm not going to spend much time on this, but I think what we are trying to say here is that if I may to elaborate the set of slides which we presented earlier, a focus of any organization should be that how do I automate the maximum number of high severity alerts. Of course there is a long term objective of maybe automating the medium and maybe down the line low as well, but that has always to be a secondary milestone. The priority has to be that high priority alerts has to be the first one which gets automated. What is the approach? I think we have talked about it, which is to map it back to MITRE. Now, of course, many of the customer organizations which we work with are also bounded by certain compliances. I'm deliberately not using the word regulatory because, of course, there are regulatory compliances as well, and there could be IT governance related compliances such as ISO for that matter. So, MITRE can be a great supplement to building use cases along with any other framework such as an ISO 27001. It could be a regulatory framework such as PCI, etc., to build a complete set of one, a use case library, two, building a automated set of actions. And this is what we'll deliberate in this next set of slides, is that how I use threat modeling exercise using MITRE to build relevance and control analysis within a customer environment. Yeah. So 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 further elaborating on this, so I think we touched upon this, that if I need to build a relevance into a customer environment, and what we have represented here is the cyber threat model for financial services, courtesy NIST. uh, Now, of course, we don't start at the left, which is more to do with strategy and risk, where the organization is the best fit to assess the risk at from a business and strategy level. Where we see us as a player in the managed security side really coming in is focusing on the environment specific risk or IT related risk. Now, what how do I really build that map up? So as we elaborated in the last set of slides, one is advisory modeling on the customer vertical. Now this advisory modeling on customer vertical earlier was a huge task in itself, but with MITRE attack, of course, we now know that we can easily filter around in terms of APT groups, either based on the relevant geography or based on the vertical. And of course, sometime a customer can span multiple these verticals as well. It could be a government organization, it could be a healthcare, so it can span sometimes multiple verticals as well. But that attack modeling basically has become much easier now with MITRE attack. So one is to get customer specific data, which is what are the assets, applications, how is the data flow, who accesses what, from where are these applications accessed, uh, building the relevancy in terms of the tactics and techniques relevant to you as to that customer, and then building a set of use cases. Now, if you see the last three items, individual and use cases, what do I mean by that is some of these techniques can be detected just by a single alert from a single tool, so it doesn't have to go into this huge detection logic spanning multiple devices. I can get an alert from a EDR source, which could probably map to a corresponding technique right away, right? So it's a single device, single use case. And of course there are use cases which are going to span multiple devices as well. And if I create a use case around multiple devices, then so has to be the automated response around it. So this is the final deliverable, which is either a single device based use case, a multi-device, multi-correlation use case, and of course an automated response as well. So this is the approach. As I said, IT based, risk analysis, advisory modeling using MITRE, and then creating these single device based use cases, multi device use cases, and an automated response as well around it. Let me see if I may request to move on. Yeah. So I think, as I said, probably covered it, that we have talked about the TTP coverage. This is what all goes into, finally the use case deliverables for the customer. Let me see. I'll just request to move to the next slide.
Sure.
Now, yeah, this is the part where the relevancy to the customer environment really comes in. Now, as I said, like, if I want to build a solid detection logic within the environment, and also give inputs to the customer as to maybe a certain protective control missing, what I will need to do is first really build relevance, that what are those threat vectors which are key to the customer. Now many of these threat vectors, as I said, some of these are customer specific based on analysis of their environment. Many of these are mapped back to MITRE attacks. So for example, something like a high data exfiltration, it is something which is common across all customers, and it falls across the right side of the MITRE attack. So as I said, there is an element of these threat vectors, either one specific to a customer organization, two basis the work which MITRE has already done. And what we first try and do through this approach is really build a solid set of control mapping to say that I have this threat vector which is high classified data exfiltration. What are the tools which can help me, one, mitigate this, and of course if there is going to be a mitigation action from this device, or maybe just a alerting kind of action, can I take this data into my detection and response tool? So if you look at this particular chart, what it tries to do is basically build a complete list of mapping to the tools which are deployed in the customer environment, and map it back to what are those top threat vectors to you or to the customer organization. So let me see if I just move on to the next one. So yeah, again, you can further, so this is one more one more layer deep dive in terms of this threat vector, that we have talked about the different threat vectors. As I said, many of them come from the MITRE attack, some of them are customer specific. What we try and build is that what are those channels which are going to be used by those attackers, and what that channel essentially allows us to do is that once I define this channel, how does it map back to the existing control? So you might have, so again the list here which is represented is of course these are we have just given a representative sample of vendors based on some analysis. So this is something, this just a disclaimer that this is a point in time snapshot of a particular assessment. These tools can be substituted with other technologies as well. What we are just trying to highlight is, based on a relevance to a customer environment, what are those rules which I can draw up. As I said, there are two deliverables for me which I can deliver to the customer. One is a single use case, single device single use case, multi device multi playbook use case. So what we are talking about here is, I have built what are the top threat actors, what are the corresponding threat vectors, what are the channels in which they operate, and two, what are the current set of devices, and can some of the existing devices detect such kind of behaviors. So that is what we are trying to represent. This is exactly the type of control mapping which goes in from our side when we are creating these use case assessment. Mish, if I may, next time. Yeah. Now what this also allows us to do is that uh, it also helps us to tell the customer that there might be gaps in terms of the MITRE attack. So this is what, these are the top 10 or 15 relevant techniques to you as a customer. Now based on what you currently have, there is this gap. You probably don't have this control right now in your environment. So it's something which we present very transparently to the customer, saying that at this moment of time you might not have this control, so please take these mitigation steps, or you have some sort of compensating control, or you just accept it as a risk, that this is a risk which you are carrying. If the risk acceptance is okay, then let's move it. So this coverage and gap analysis is something which we are able to draw on basis the work which goes into the tool assessment, analysis of the threat vector, attack, etc. And this kind of gap analysis what we present to the customer. Now if we move on, so yeah, this is where all of this come together: attack surface, MITRE, as I said. What are those attack vectors? We showed you what could be an individual use case. Now we'll just in the next slide give an example of an integrated use case as well, which will just yeah. So this is, I think these are the final two slides from our end. But what we wanted to basically show here is that when it comes to the type of complexity which can be built in, right, there is no end to the type of complicated use cases, playbooks which we can build, uh, either with complete automation for all the 15 work for 15 workflows which we have mentioned here, or it could be as I talked about in the earlier set of slides, that we can have the enrichment done automated, we can have the automated response maybe done separately. But what MITRE is basically lending us here is that we have built analysis of what is relevant to the customer organization. We have taken some customer specific inputs, that based on their inventory and assets, what is the threat vector which is of relevance to them. We have done a complete control analysis and map it back to them, that through these devices, this is what you can detect, this is what you cannot detect. So whatever we cannot detect has gone as a gap or risk to the customer. What we can detect using maybe either a single device based rule or multi device based rule. And for the second factor, we can literally build complexity across multiple devices. It can span multiple tactics, so it also links back to the point which Ramesh was mentioning, that some of the tactics and techniques, tactics are essentially, they remain the same, but some of the techniques and sub procedures essentially overlap. So what is it that you are getting as a coverage on the MITRE attack side through this automation or automated response? So these are two representations we have in the in the next two slides. So I think at this point I'll just take a pause for the presentation, and then we'll quickly just walk you through the video which we have, uh, which is around the automated simulation testing. Yes. Ramesh, sorry, I think you'll have to just
Yeah, yeah.
put the
Just give me
video up
one
as
minute.
well. Sure,
Give
sure.
me 1 minute.
I think, yeah, I mean, I think we are seeing a lot of great responses to our uh, MITRE attack related questionnaire as well. So I I think we are seeing people who are very well aware or using MITRE attack already within their enterprise. So I think you'll find the next set of video very helpful. Ramesh, what we'll also do is that there are some great questions which have come in. Maybe once we flash our video, we'll just take those also. I think that I see there are two or three great questions coming in.
Sure. Are you able to see my screen?
Not yet, not yet.
How about now, Anup?
Now it is. Yes, now it is.
Okay.
Yes, now. Thank you so much for putting this up.
Yeah.
So yeah, so what we wanted to do essentially through this is, I think we have talked a lot of talk till now, and we didn't really want this to be essentially a lot of slides, but it has to also be backed up by substance at our end. Uh, Now what we wanted to show is that, of course, we are talking about a certain level of maturity, and even MITRE says that, for a sufficiently highly mature organization, where an organization which is sufficiently mature in terms of using MITRE places a lot of emphasis on exchange of information between the blue team and the red team. uh, this video is all about that, where essentially using MITRE Caldera as a simulation testing tool. How is it that we can detect MITRE related patterns? So Ramesh, if I may just pause here for a
Sure.
minute. Yeah. So if you see here, now this is what we have also tried to uh, ingrain within the SOC of at our end, that if I am in a deployment where there is a continuous evaluation in necessitated, because some of the enterprises which you are working with are highly critical in nature. Of course, we as an organization also are a national critical infrastructure, so it necessitates that whichever controls which we have at our end are also tested thoroughly and effectively. And what you are showing here is essentially usage of MITRE Caldera. Uh, what we are trying to do here is testing the relevant techniques within our environment. So OS credential dump using MITRE Caldera. So as I said, you as an organization might have multiple different ways to get this accomplished. um, you could use MITRE Caldera. Somebody might already be using Red Canary's atomic red team framework. There are, of course, third party solution as well for breach simulation testing, all good in their own right. But by and large, what we have done is we have embraced MITRE, because this also lends itself well to a lot of customization at our end, which is definitely required. So what we wanted to show in this video is execution of this. So in this, one of our platform engineering team member is essentially executing a OS credential dump. And Ramesh, if I may, yeah, please, we can. So we can see that there are multiple options, and yeah, we essentially do a simulation of those. uh, Here, of course, we are trying to dump the LSAS process to get credentials from that source.
So basically, what we showed in the earlier slide, right? There are agents that get deployed on certain points, and when you execute this tool from a central place, it goes and executes this particular command in that agent. And in a particular endpoint, what it is trying to do is it is trying to dump the LSAS's process memory and trying to extract credentials from there. So we'll see whether that is successful or not, and what is the kind of alert that gets generated out of this attempt.
Which maybe we move on to the part where I think,
Sure.
yes, yeah.
Yeah.
So again, yeah, sorry, Amish.
I've just passed it. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. So I think basically, I think, as we said, right, um, in this case, you have a certain detection pattern. Now within the demo, of course, there is possibility for us to build or bridge multiple different products to have this detection. But we wanted to specifically highlight that one, throughout the talk, what we have tried to stress on is how do you build relevance to you as a customer organization. So one is look at the top attacks specific to the vertical. Of course, as I said, most of them are endpoint related. Many of them involve credential dumping. So the relevance which you are trying to build is, then in that case, if through this whole assessment, the objective is that I am trying to simulate a credential dump. Am I able to detect it through the corresponding products in my environment? So this is the second part, which is, once you have tested, either you get a yes or no. In this case, the detection is in place. So you are getting this alert from the endpoint security product. And of course, now most of the endpoint security products are also using MITRE for mapping. So they will map to the corresponding technique, which is what you can see here, even in the detection part, that the detection also specifically highlights that this is the technique which is getting executed. Yeah, Ramesh, I think we can move on.
Yeah.
Yes. And yeah, and this is precisely the type of threat intel which can get further percolated on. If, for example, you don't see this detection happening within your environment, then you if as is being shown here, you can just go into the corresponding MITRE attack, the definition of those. You can see what are the corresponding detection patterns which are required. Now this is the part where basically we as a MSSP try and come in. So this is essentially our MSSP view, which is all about capturing this information and making it as detailed as possible, specifically for our internal team. So what we are trying here is that essentially when an incident is presented to our team, one is, this has been of course a simulation of sorts, but through that simulation, the whole response, that is alert getting detected on the endpoint to alert getting visible into my system, through linking it back to some sort of automation and getting the right amount of data into my service management system, is the process which we have tried to build a lot on. As I said, we are also trying to really give more importance to the technique and technique information, which was what was being shown by Ramesh or his team in the last slide. That is, get as much data as possible back into the endpoint. So I think what we'll do is we'll basically run this next the next one only. Again, as I said, in this case there is another technique which we are executing. This is assert util rename and recode. Again, the objective is test the effectiveness. Are we able to detect it through the current platforms? This being of course something where we couldn't have a live demo. We have tried to show detections, but again, in any organization, the objective is that of course not everything is going to be detected. So if you don't detect it, then you can always rely on MITRE attack to get you that corresponding detection built in. And it is not going to be uh, so to say a first hit success. Now of course we are where we are based on a lot of research on detection patterns, but it is not that you any organization which is implementing this is going to be successful right away. There is going to be a lot of trials, there is going to be a lot of false positives. And I think something which MITRE also says in their side, that you cannot eliminate false positives altogether even with this approach. So objective is to try and get to certain confidence that you can at least build detection capabilities. So yeah, again, this is what we are seeing here, that I'm able to detect this particular technique, which is deobfuscate decode of the files. Yeah. And as I said, the detection pattern, if it is not available, what are the platforms, what how is it that I can basically detect this pattern, is something, yeah, which we are able to do. So, Ramesh, I think what we'll do is, if you are okay, we can take those two questions now.
Sure.
Uh,
Yeah.
I'll
So just one
maybe.
point here.
Sure,
So,
please, please.
if you also see, there are multiple techniques that get executed, but in the back end, it all comes and gets updated in the same ticket, right? So there are logic built in the back end in such a way that if multiple tickets are getting triggered for a single host, right? Those all get aggregated and get updated in a single ticket. And as we explained you earlier, this is a part of the larger process. Once a couple of events start updating into the system, parallelly the SOAR engine will kickstart and it will start the auto investigation process. It will go until remediation. Remediation could be to a point where, via the tools at the endpoint, we can kick off we can kick out the system, from the network. So all of the intelligence is actually getting built in the backend. Or else what happens is, with the amount of alerts that get generated, it will be very difficult for SOC engineers to look all of those together to form a bigger picture.
Great. Thanks so much, Ramesh. Ramesh, I think I think there is a great question which maybe I'll request you to respond.
Sure.
Uh, uh, the question is from Vandit Sharma, and the question is that we have seen threat groups changing their techniques and targeting industries which they didn't before. How do you tackle that? How do we build a hypothesis around its detection? So I think it's specifically around people changing their techniques and patterns, and how do we keep pace with that?
Yeah, so it also depends on what kind of research team that you build in the back end, right? We will have to constantly be going through the threat reports and intelligence out of what is happening in the external environment. As we said before, from MITRE standpoint, it is mostly focusing on known threats, but then the attack behaviors that get generated out of the known threats are repetitive in other threats as well. So it is very, very important for us to keep track of what an attacker is doing, and when we create the advisories out of research for a particular attack, and that's when the techniques get embedded into the system as a form of TTP and gets percolated into the whole detection system. So a lot of research work and keeping updated with what is happening on known attacks is definitely required here. MITRE is one source of all of this, but for example, in Tatacom, we have a threat research team who looks at lot other sources as well. And that is when they write a particular advisory based on a known attack that is happening in the industry, they also map the MITRE TTPs. We also spoke about the TRAM tool before, right? So they also map the MITRE TTPs before they ingest this intelligence into the threat intelligence system. That gets percolated, into all the systems. But yes, a lot of research work is required for this.
Yeah, and I think Ramesh, also to add, I think the part where we spoke about, right, that lot of analysis goes into the tools as well. So many of the tools remain constant. So for example, if a particular adversary is using Cobalt Strike, and MITRE says that this is the type of pattern you have, uh, I think if the advisory suddenly changes the way in which Cobalt Strike he is operating, then that goes into our database. I mean, it's essentially a catch up in terms of what are
Absolutely.
those top tools, yeah, top tools associated techniques. So I think your question was very spot on. That, I mean, the answer was spot on in that essentially it's a continuous cycle. MITRE will help you maybe get there in terms of a very solid baseline, but it is absolutely a continuous work in progress. And I think there is a question from Mr. Suhad Darvi as well, that how do you eliminate alert fatigue and reduce skill dependency in the SOC operation? So I think that we tried to answer, Mr. Suhas, that essentially what we have tried to do is 80% of all SOC L1 tickets are now automated in our in our environment. What that essentially means is that alert fatigue typically also comes from a lot of these manual tasks where person goes into, let's say, a threat intel platform, verifies the risk reputation, he looks at the past history of that asset, etc. He might be doing phishing analysis. So all that also tends to be at some point of time boring for these people. And the skill anyway is a there is a big skill shortage in this area. So what we have tried to do is essentially automate. 80% is where we are currently with L1 automation. That's where we'll continue to stress on to reduce and eliminate alert fatigue. Ramesh, if you want to add something to
Yeah,
that, yeah.
and also the introduction of more multi-correlated, use cases out of the threat matrix will actually, help you, reduce the alert fatigues. What happens is, at one side, there are alerts that are getting generated, and that goes into the automation engine for enrichment and, triage process to see how much of, fatigue we can reduce for an engineer. Whereas parallelly a set of multi-correlated use case gets ingested into the system. So when we say multi-correlated, how do we map tactics together? How do we map multiple techniques on a tactic, right? Those things, if it gets triggered, it automatically takes a higher priority. We even explained that in the SOC automation slides, right? So moment it takes a higher priority, it goes into the response first, and then it comes further into more investigation and analysis. So two parts. One, the alerts that get generated for single techniques, how does it get auto enriched, and then the ticket that goes into the SOC's queue are getting reduced based on the enrichment. Two, a constant ingestion of multi-correlated use cases and assigning a higher severity level for that, and allocating more priority when it comes to a trigger, from those use cases in specific.
Great. So I think, yeah, thank you so much, Mr. Kumar, for your feedback. I think we are pretty much there. I see also a question around the PPT being available. So we'll probably pass it back to the DSCI team, for confirmation on that. Uh, I think we are pretty much wrap. I'll just Avinash, if you are there, if you have any closing comments. Ramesh, just give me yeah, Ramesh, I think Avinash. So, sir, we are just wrapping up our session. For any closing comments from your side.
I think it was a wonderful deep dive where we kind of really were able to sequence it, going down the tree of understanding the variety of how the thinking can be aligned around attacks, around business, around proactive hunting, linking it to hypothesis, and I really like the interactions and also the quiz on that. So would like to thank everyone for their participation and the engagement on this session, and to Anup and Ramesh for giving this briefing. Over to Vivek. Vivek, you are on mute. We can't hear you.
Okay, so thank you, Avinash, Anup, and Ramesh for insightful discussions on MicroTac framework. I'm sure it would have helped all the participants to understand dynamics of MicroTac framework and how we can leverage that in terms of accelerating the security operations, in terms of identifying those knowns and unknowns, techniques and procedures. Next thing is that we would really appreciate your presence in this workshop and asking some of the key questions and also answering some of the questions in the poll. Now I'm just pasting a link for a feedback actually. So I'm just dropping that into the chat box. So I would request each and everyone to please fill a feedback form. It would really help team to understand some of the preferences about your preferences about MetaTag framework, its usage, and how you wanted to see it in your security operations center. So please, I would request everyone to just visit and just fill the feedback form. I'm just dropping it into chat box. Just 1 minute. So here you go. So the link is given over here. So I would request everyone to please visit Google document and submit your feedbacks about the workshop and also about some of your preferences in MetaTag framework. It would really help team to understand some of the dynamics, and if there are questions, you can always reach out to Anup, Ramesh, and Avinash separately. So thank you. I would again like to thank all of you for being very active participants, asking questions, and also answering some of the polls. So thank you one more time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks Anup, thanks Ramesh, thanks Avinash.
Thank you.